I learned the truth about my stepmother the day my father died, not because she confessed, but because she finally stopped pretending. My name is Ava Mitchell, and for 14 years I believed Grace was the woman who saved our broken family. She cooked for us, prayed with us, hugged me like a mother, and whispered, "Sweetheart, I'll always protect you." But 3 hours after the funeral, as we sat in the attorney's dark mahogany conference room, her mask slipped. The moment the lawyer opened my father's will, Grace leaned toward me, her perfume sugary and suffocating, and whispered, "You'll get nothing, Ava. Your father wanted it that way." Her voice was soft, almost tender. But when the attorney turned the next page, Grace's face went white, her hands trembled, her smile died, and in that instant I understood. She hadn't just lied to me for years. She had planned to steal everything. I was 12 when my mother died, old enough to understand the word gone, but too young to grasp what it meant to lose the person who made the world feel safe just by existing. For weeks after the funeral, the house felt hollow. My father moved like a ghost through the rooms, touching the furniture the way someone touches memories carefully, painfully. He tried to hide his grief from me, but even as a kid, I could see it devouring him. And then Grace appeared. She came into our lives like a warm breeze through an open window, gentle, soothing, smelling faintly of lavender lotion. She was one of the nurses at the cardiac rehab center where Dad was being treated for stress-related complications. The first time I met her, she knelt to my eye level and said, "Hi, sweetheart. Your dad talks about you all the time." Her voice was soft, her smile comforting, and God, I wanted to believe her. In the beginning, she felt like hope. She braided my hair before school. She told me stories about her childhood. She made blueberry pancakes on Saturday mornings just the way Mom used to. One night, when I woke up from a nightmare, she rushed into my room and held my hand. "You're safe, Ava," she whispered. "I'm here. You're not alone." I didn't realize it then, but that was the moment she slipped into a space in my life that had never been hers. She and Dad grew close fast, too fast. Within a year, they were married in a small backyard ceremony with fairy lights and white roses. I stood beside Dad, smiling in the pictures, but something in me had begun to tighten, like fabric being pulled at the seams. Because after the wedding, Grace's sweetness shifted. Not all at once, slowly, subtly, like a room darkening as someone dims the lights. She stopped braiding my hair. Instead, she commented on how frizzy it always looked. She stopped cooking me pancakes. Instead, she said, "Maybe you should eat less sugar, sweetheart. Teenage girls need self-control." In public, she bragged about how close we were. In private, she became different. Once, when Dad was out of town, I brought home a B on a math test. I thought she'd help me study. Instead, she tilted her head and said, "That's disappointing, Ava. Your father expects better. Crying won't fix it, weakness never does." Oh, I wasn't crying. I didn't even know I could cry yet. But her words stung so deeply it felt like she'd slapped me. Still, around Dad, Grace was glowing warmth. She wiped his glasses, packed his lunches, reminded him to take his meds, and kissed his forehead every morning before he left for work. And every time he looked at her, his eyes softened the way they used to soften for Mom. I didn't dare ruin that, so I stayed quiet. I swallowed my discomfort. I convinced myself I was imagining things. For years, Grace lived two lives, the doting wife and the gentle stepmother, and the cold, calculating woman who watched me with eyes that measured, not loved. But the day my father fell sick, her mask didn't just slip. It cracked. And the real Grace, the one who wanted more than love, who wanted everything, began to show herself. My father had always been larger than life to me, the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he said nothing. He built Mitchell Engineering from a single rented office into a multi-million-dollar enterprise. He was respected, admired, feared, even. But illness shrinks people, and cancer devours everything. Strength, certainty, even dignity. When Dad was diagnosed with stage 4 pancreatic cancer, I flew home the same night. I remember running into the hospital room, expecting him to greet me with that tired but warm smile he reserved only for me. Instead, I saw Grace sitting at his bedside, stroking his hair, whispering softly. She didn't even notice I'd entered until Dad weakly reached for my hand. "Ava," he whispered. Grace turned sharply, startled, almost irritated. "Oh, sweetheart. You're early." Her smile was strained, her eyes cold. I brushed past her. "I came as soon as they called. She stood, blocking the monitors like she didn't want me to see the numbers flashing red. "He's fragile," she said. "He shouldn't be overwhelmed right now. He's my father." My voice cracked. She sighed dramatically. "Yes, but you know how emotional you get." I froze. Because it wasn't what she said. It was how she said it. Sharp. Dismissive. Like I was a burden. Dad weakly squeezed my hand, trying to speak, but Grace leaned over him, adjusting his pillow. "You need rest, Richard," she said sweetly. "Let me handle the conversations." Something in me twisted. Over the next few weeks, that twisting grew into a knot so tight I could barely breathe. Grace controlled everything. His medications, his visitors, his phone, his meals, his sleep schedule, his doctors. Every time I tried to talk to him privately, she appeared out of nowhere offering tea, adjusting curtains, interrupting with medical excuses. One afternoon, I arrived early and heard her voice through the slightly open door. Soft, sweet, venomous. "Don't worry, darling," she murmured. "I'll take care of everything when you're gone. I know what you want. I know who deserves what." The implication hit me like a punch. I pushed the door open. She jolted, eyes wide for a fraction of a second before the mask slipped back on. "Ava," she said cheerfully. "You startled me." Dad turned his head toward me slowly. His eyes were glassy, frightened. "Dad? Are you okay?" I rushed to him. Grace blocked me with her body, literally stepped between us. "He needs rest," she whispered sharply. "Not stress." I stared at her. And for the first time, she didn't bother pretending. Her eyes locked on mine with a challenge. Cold, hard, a look that said, "I own this room. I own him. And soon, I'll own everything else." I swallowed hard and backed away. Because, deep down, I already knew the truth. Even if I couldn't admit it yet, Grace wasn't caring for my father. She was isolating him. Piece by piece. Day by day, until she would be the only voice he heard. And then he died. Peacefully, they said. In his sleep. Grace cried the loudest, except her tears didn't sound like grief. They sounded like victory. 3 hours after the funeral, she grabbed my hand outside the attorney's office and whispered, "Let's get this over with." Richard wanted me to have peace. But the way she said peace felt a lot like $191 million. The attorney's office didn't look like a place where families shattered. It smelled of lemon polish and quiet wealth, with a massive mahogany table stretching across the room and bookshelves so tall they seemed to touch heaven itself. But for me, that room would become the place where illusions died. Grace walked in first, hips swaying, pearls glistening, moving like she already owned every inch of the building. She dressed carefully. A black designer dress, soft curls, flawless makeup, the image of a grieving, dignified widow. I followed behind her, fingers cold, stomach tight, heart beating too loud. Attorney Samuel Clark, Dad's lawyer of over 2 decades, stood when we entered. "Ava," he said gently, shaking my hand. "Grace," he added politely but not warmly. Grace didn't notice. Or maybe she didn't care. She sat at the head of the table. Not beside it. Not next to me. At the head, like she'd already claimed the throne. I sat across from her. Mr. Clark opened a thick blue folder. "We'll begin with." Before he could finish, Grace leaned toward me, her perfume thick and sugary, and whispered with a smile so sweet it made me sick. "You'll get nothing, Ava. Your father wanted it that way." I froze. Her voice didn't shake. Her smile didn't waver. Her eyes didn't blink. It wasn't grief speaking. It wasn't shock. It wasn't sadness. It was certainty. The certainty of someone who believed she had already won. She reached over and patted my hand like I was a child. "Don't worry, sweetheart," she murmured. "You're young. You'll be fine without all this." But the way she said all this, her glance sliding down the length of the mahogany table, the polished floor, the towering windows overlooking the city, told me exactly what she meant. Money. The company. The estate. My father's legacy. Mine, not hers. Mr. Clark cleared his throat deliberately, reclaiming the room. "If we may begin," he said, sliding on his glasses. Grace straightened her back, chin lifted high, wearing triumph like perfume. "This is the last will and testament of Richard James Mitchell, executed 9 months ago." 9 months ago. My chest tightened. That was when Dad could still speak in full sentences. Before he declined? Before he became a shell? So Grace's narrative that Dad had changed everything in her favor at the end crumbled instantly. But she didn't realize that yet. Mr. Clark continued, "To my daughter, Ava Elaine Mitchell." Grace stiffened. "I leave the contents of the sealed letter in Section 4A of this document. She alone may read it." Her lips parted slightly. Just slightly. A flicker, a crack, but she held her smile. Mr. Clark turned the page. "And to my wife, Grace Harper Mitchell." Grace sat up taller. Her nostrils flared. I swear she almost started to reach for imaginary car keys. "I leave the property at Willow Creek, the lakeside house, and the Lexus hybrid." The pen slipped from her hand. "What?" she whispered. Mr. Clark ignored her and flipped to the final page. His voice calm, steady, almost too gentle. "And the remainder of my estate, including all liquid assets, corporate investments, and majority ownership of Mitchell Engineering, valued at approximately $191 million. I leave entirely to my daughter, Ava Mitchell." Silence. Not the kind that comes from shock. The kind that comes from someone's world collapsing in absolute, devastating, humiliating real time. Grace's face drained of color. Her jaw fell open. Then, quietly, a whisper she didn't mean to say out loud. That isn't the will." Those 6 words told me everything. She was expecting another document. Another version. One I wasn't supposed to see. One where she didn't just win. She took it all. But this was Dad's real voice. His final truth. And Grace finally realized. She wasn't about to inherit a fortune. She was about to inherit nothing. Mr. Clark slid a cream-colored envelope toward me. My name, Ava, written in the shaky handwriting I knew better than my own. Grace lunged forward as if the letter were a weapon. "I should see that?" she snapped. Mr. Clark didn't even blink. "Absolutely not. This is for Ava only." Her mouth pinched into a tight, trembling line. My fingers shook as I broke the seal. The room blurred. I could smell Dad's cedarwood shaving cream and hospital antiseptic as if he were sitting beside me. Finally, I unfolded the letter. His handwriting. Slower. But still undeniably Dad. "My dearest Ava, if you are reading this, then I am gone. And I owe you the truth I should have told you long before now." My throat tightened. Grace leaned so close I could feel her breath, a sour-sweet mix of desperation and fading perfume. I angled the letter away from her and kept reading. "I failed you. Not because I didn't love you, but because I trusted the wrong person with our lives." Grace's inhaled sharply, her face stiffening. For years, Grace hid who she truly was. She knew when I was weak. She knew when you were vulnerable. And she used that to wedge herself between us. My heart thudded so hard I could feel it in my teeth. Grace whispered. He was confused. He didn't mean... I raised a hand to silence her. Mr. Clark nodded approvingly. I continued. 3 months before my diagnosis, I discovered documents in her desk drawer. Drafts of a will, one that left everything to her. And nothing to you. Grace's chair scraped violently against the floor as she stood. That's a lie. He was sick. Delusional. You can't believe... Mr. Clark's voice cut like a blade. We have those drafts on file. Grace paled. Her breathing quickened. I kept reading. When I confronted her, she cried. Then she lied. Then she pretended she wrote it by mistake. But I saw her for who she truly was that night. My hands trembled. Dad knew. He'd known for months. Ava, the moment I realized you were no longer safe. Emotionally, financially, even physically. I made a new will. Grace's voice dropped to a hiss. This is ridiculous. He was confused. He didn't understand half of what he signed. Mr. Clark leaned forward. He was evaluated by 2 independent physicians and declared fully competent on every signature. Grace shut her mouth. Hard. I trusted Samuel Clark with my final instructions. I trusted him to protect you from what she would do when I was gone. My vision blurred. The words swam, but I forced myself to keep reading. She isolated me from you. She monitored my calls. She kept you away when I needed you most. A sob escaped me. I didn't mean to, it just tore itself from my chest. Dad had seen everything. He'd known everything. And he'd stayed silent to protect me. I read the final paragraph slowly, each sentence like a heartbeat. Ava, you are not weak. You never were. Grace told you that because she feared you. Feared your goodness. Feared your strength. Feared your place in my life. Grace's lip curled. I kept reading. So, I am leaving everything to you. Not because you need it, but because she must never have it. The last lines shattered me. Ava, I am sorry. For every day you felt unseen. For every moment she made you feel less. For letting her steal years that belonged to us. Build a life worthy of your mother. And forgive me, if you can. I love you. Dad, I lowered the letter. The silence in the room felt suffocating. Grace's mascara streaked down her cheeks. Her hands trembled. Her eyes darted between me and the attorney like a trapped animal. She whispered my name, barely audible. Ava, please. But there was no please that could undo the truth. My father hadn't just exposed her. He had judged her. And he had chosen me. For the first time in years, I felt my spine straighten. Like I'd been living bent under an invisible weight. One she had placed on me. But Dad lifted it with a single letter. Grace's mask, the one she'd worn for over a decade, fell apart completely. And now she looked at me not as a daughter, but as the woman who held the power she'd spent years scheming to steal. The letter slipped from my fingers and drifted onto the polished table like a fallen verdict. But it wasn't the paper that shook the room. It was the truth inside it, and the way that truth began suffocating Grace. She stared at me, her chest rising too fast, her lips trembling. Ava, she whispered, you have to listen to me. No, I said softly. You're done talking. Her eyes flared with rage, but she tried to hide it behind a quivering smile. You don't understand. Your father? He wasn't well. He didn't know what he was signing. Mr. Clark leaned back in his chair, folding his hands calmly. Mrs. Mitchell, you signed as a witness to his medical competency evaluation. Grace froze. I watched the color drain from her face, inch by inch. That was just a formality, she sputtered. It didn't mean anything. It meant, Mr. Clark replied evenly, that you knew he was of sound mind when he made his will. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping on dry land. Then something snapped inside her. She slammed both palms on the table. I took care of him, she screamed. I fed him. I washed him. I wiped his tears. I held his hand when he couldn't sleep. I deserved what he promised me. I stood so fast my chair screeched against the floor. What he promised you? I leaned forward. He promised me that he loved me. He promised me that I mattered. He promised our family that he'd protect us. And you turned him against me. You isolated him. You lied to him. Her mascara smudged into jagged lines. I did everything, Grace shrieked. You left. You had your big city job, your glamorous life. My life? I choked. You mean the life I was forced to build because every time I came home, you told me Dad needed rest, that my presence upset him, that I was too emotional, too dramatic, too much? She flinched. I stepped around the table, closing the distance between us. You told him I didn't care about him, I continued. You told him I was selfish. You told him I abandoned him. Her jaw tightened. He believed me, she spat, because I was the one who was here. You were here, I said coldly, because you wanted the money. Grace's voice dropped into something dark. You think you deserve it? She laughed, a warped, brittle sound. You were a child when I came into this family. I taught you how to behave, how to dress, how to be strong. My nose is priviciditten. You taught me fear, I said quietly. You taught me silence. You taught me that love could become a weapon. Her facade shattered right there, I saw it in her eyes. She lunged toward me. You owe me, she hissed. I stayed by his side when you didn't. If he didn't want me to have the money, why would he? Forge your signature? Mr. Clark interrupted calmly. We have the documents, Mrs. Mitchell. The DA's office has been notified. You may want to consider your next words very carefully. For a moment, I thought she might faint. Then she snapped her gaze back to me. Ava, please, you don't have to ruin my life. I inhaled sharply. You ruined your own life when you tried to rewrite his. She stepped closer, voice trembling, but her eyes calculating. We could make a deal, she whispered. 50-50. I'll disappear. I won't contest anything. No one needs to know the details. I stared at her. At the desperation behind her lashes. At the years of manipulation disguised as kindness. At the woman who pretended to be my mother while carving out every piece of my confidence, one criticism at a time. And for the first time, I wasn't afraid of her. Grace, I said. I wouldn't give you a penny even if you were starving. Her face twisted. You're just like your father, she said bitterly. He thought money couldn't buy happiness. He thought love was enough. And look how he died, scared, confused, helpless. Something inside me snapped. I didn't shout. I didn't scream. My voice was low, deadly still. "He died loved," I whispered. "Something you will never understand." She opened her mouth, but nothing came out. Silence pressed on the room like a storm. Mr. Clark cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said, "at this point I must legally advise you that any additional statements may be used against you in formal proceedings." Grace staggered backward, gripping the back of her chair. "You can't do this to me," she sobbed. "I have nothing if you do this." I met her eyes. "You had everything," I said, "and you destroyed it." She sank into the chair, shoulders shaking. Not grieving, not remorseful, just broken. By her own greed. And as I watched tears stream down the face that had once smiled while braiding my hair, I realized something. This wasn't just a confrontation. This was the moment the truth finally burned away every lie she had ever wrapped herself in. And for the first time in 14 years, I was free. Grace didn't leave the conference room voluntarily. She collapsed into the chair, shoulders shaking. Mascara streaked across her cheeks like black rivers cutting through pale, cracking porcelain. Mr. Clark stacked the will, the evidence reports, and the sealed letter neatly on the table, his movements calm, deliberate, almost ceremonial. Then he looked at Grace with the kind of patience a surgeon uses before making the first incision. "Mrs. Mitchell," he said gently, "there are some legal matters we must address now." Grace's head jerked up. "Legal? I haven't done anything illegal." Mr. Clark arched an eyebrow. It was the kind of eyebrow lift that said, "Please stop lying in front of professionals." "I'm afraid the district attorney disagrees," he said. "And so do the forensic analysts who confirmed your attempted forgery." And that was Dayford. I watched her breathing quicken, shallow, panicked. "Those forms weren't forged," she snapped. "Richard told me to sign them. He said he trusted me." "Interesting," Mr. Clark replied, "because his journal entries say otherwise." My stomach tightened. "His journal?" I whispered. He nodded. "Your father documented everything once he became suspicious." Grace blinked. "He kept a journal?" "You read it," Mr. Clark shot back. "Which is also part of the investigation." Her mouth fell open. She scrambled for words, but all that came out was a stuttered mess. I was protecting him. He was sick. He didn't know what he wanted." "No," I said quietly. "He knew exactly what he wanted. What he didn't know was how far you would go to take it." Grace slammed her fist against the table. "I took care of him." Her voice cracked so loudly it startled even herself. "I fed him. I cleaned him. I stayed up all night while he cried. Why shouldn't I get something for that?" "Because love," I said, "isn't a transaction." She glared at me, chest heaving, and for a moment I saw it not the monster, but the truth. Grace didn't love Dad. She loved being needed. She loved being in control. She loved being the center of someone else's world. The money was just the prize. Mr. Clark cleared his throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, your late husband left instructions that you be provided temporary housing for 30 days and a modest stipend for living expenses." Grace blinked. "A stipend?" she echoed weakly. "Yes," Mr. Clark said, "until the court determines whether you will face charges." Her mouth fell open. She grabbed the table for support. "Charges?" she whispered. "You're going to ruin me, both of you." I met her eyes. "You ruined yourself," I said. "Dad didn't do that. I didn't do that. Your lies did that." She shook her head violently. "No, no, Ava, please." Her voice dropped into a trembling whisper. "You can stop this. If you tell them you don't want to pursue anything, they'll back off. They always listen to heirs." I swallowed hard. For a moment, a brief, flickering moment, I saw the woman she had pretended to be for years. The nurse. The caretaker. The warm smile. The soft hands. The motherly presence. But then I remembered the other Grace. The one who told me weakness made people leave. The one who isolated me from my father. The one who watched me cry and smiled like she enjoyed it. The one who forged my father's signature. The one who whispered, "You'll get nothing with satisfaction, not sorrow." I straightened my spine. "I'm not stopping anything," I said. "Dad trusted the law. Dad trusted Mr. Clark. And Dad trusted me." Her face crumpled. "You're heartless." "No," I said. "I'm finally learning to be strong." Mr. Clark slid a series of official documents toward her. "Mrs. Mitchell, these require your acknowledgement. They outline immediate separation from estate affairs, frozen access to all financial accounts, and the forthcoming hearing. She stared at the papers like they were written in a language she'd never seen. I'm not signing these," she whispered. Mr. Clark shrugged. "That's your right. But refusal won't stop the process." Grace let out a hollow, broken sound, something between a laugh and a sob. "This can't be happening." "It is," I said softly. "And it's because of what you did." Her eyes darted to me, wild, frantic. "You took everything from me." "No," I said. "You tried to take everything from me, and Dad didn't let you." And for the first time since this nightmare began, it wasn't her grief that filled the room. It wasn't her lies. It wasn't her power. It was the truth. And the truth was finally on my side. The days after the will reading felt unreal, like I was walking through someone else's life, someone else's house, someone else's grief. The world outside kept moving. Cars honked. Neighbors watered their lawns. Kids rode their bikes down the street. But inside my father's home, my home now, everything was unbearably still. Boxes of his belongings lined the hallway. His slippers still sat beside his bed. His glasses were still folded neatly on the nightstand, waiting for a man who would never pick them up again. And for the first time since he died, I let myself cry. Not silent tears like before, but the kind that shake your whole body, the kind that make you realize how tightly you'd been holding everything together just so you wouldn't collapse. I cried for my father, for the years we lost, for the moments Grace stole, for the conversations we never got to finish, for the goodbye I didn't know was the last one. But somewhere in the middle of that grief, something else surfaced. Relief, because the truth was finally out. Because I didn't have to pretend anymore. Because the shadow Grace cast over my life had finally lifted. When I finally pulled myself together, I opened the boxes. Mr. Clark had delivered the ones with Dad's journals, documents, recordings, and, yes, more letters. Letters he had written over the last year, some addressed to me. Some not addressed at all, just reflections he never had the strength to say out loud. The first one I opened said, "Ava, I'm ashamed of how long it took me to see Grace clearly. But once I saw the truth, it terrified me not for myself but for you." My lips trembled as I read. Another letter said, "You were always stronger than you thought." Grace knew that and feared it. I pressed the paper to my chest. For years Grace made me feel small, insignificant, replaceable. But Dad had seen me. Really seen me even in the end. I decided then that I wouldn't let her be the defining chapter of my story. I wouldn't let the cruelty she planted take root any longer. So I started working. Not on the fortune, that part was almost mechanical, handled by accountants, attorneys, and managers. I worked on me. I visited Dad's office at Mitchell Engineering. His old desk still smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink. His employees greeted me with quiet respect, some with tears in their eyes. They told me stories about him, how he stayed late to help a new engineer fix a design flaw, how he donated anonymously to employees' medical bills, how he once paid for a janitor's son's college tuition. Stories I'd never heard, stories that made me love him even more. I hired an ethics-driven executive team, people Dad trusted, people who were overlooked when Grace began inserting herself into company affairs. I expanded the scholarship Mom once started for underprivileged girls in STEM. I funded a program to support families dealing with cancer. I rebuilt Dad's foundation for engineering students. And slowly, my life began to feel like mine again. One afternoon, as I packed books in Dad's study, I found the charm bracelet Grace gave me when I was 13, the one she clasped around my wrist as she said, "I'll always protect you, sweetheart." I held the bracelet for a long time. Not because I missed her, not because I believed her lies, but because I finally saw it for what it was. A symbol of the version of myself she tried to create. A girl who doubted her worth, who feared confrontation, who stayed small so Grace could feel big. I closed my hand around the bracelet, then placed it in a memory box, not to honor her, but to remind myself. I survived her. I outgrew her. I became who she tried to prevent me from becoming. For the first time in my life, I felt whole. Not because of the inheritance, not because Grace fell, but because I finally rose. It was 2 months after the will reading when Mr. Clark called me again. His tone was steady, practiced the voice of a man who had delivered difficult truths to grieving families for over 30 years. "Ava," he said, "I think you should sit down for this." I did. Grace has accepted a plea deal. For a moment, I said nothing. A part of me expected this, and yet hearing it aloud made everything painfully real. What kind of deal? I asked quietly. She's pleading guilty to attempted fraud, forgery, and obstruction. In exchange, she will avoid jail time, but she will be required to pay restitution and is permanently barred from making any financial claim against your father's estate. The words settled in my chest like warm, heavy sand. It wasn't revenge. It wasn't triumph. It was simply justice. Thank you, I whispered. Later that evening, I sat on the porch swing outside Dad's home, my home now, watching the sky melt into pinks and oranges. The wind stirred the leaves in his garden, the same garden he used to tend at sunrise with a cup of coffee in his hand. I closed my eyes and let myself imagine him beside me. Not sick, not frail. Just Dad alive in the way memories keep people alive. My phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. For a second, I considered ignoring it. Then curiosity won. I opened the message. I'm leaving town. I hope one day you understand why I did what I did. Grace. I stared at the screen for a long time. Understand? Understand what? Her lies? Her manipulation? Her fear of losing control? Her hunger for money she never earned? Maybe there was a version of her somewhere deep, buried under layers of insecurity that once meant well, but that wasn't the woman she chose to become, and I couldn't fix that for her. I typed slowly, letting my fingers move with the clarity of someone who'd finally stopped apologizing for the harm others caused. I understand enough. And I forgive you. But forgiveness doesn't restore what you broke. I hit send. A minute passed, then two. No reply. I set my phone down and leaned back, letting the swing move gently under me. Grace would walk away with enough to survive. Dad had ensured that much in his instructions. But survival wasn't the same as winning. She got nothing of his fortune, nothing of his legacy, nothing of the life she tried to steal. The world she built on deception had collapsed quietly, inevitably under the weight of her own choices. As for me, I inherited everything she tried to erase. Not just the $191 million, not just the company, not just the estate. I inherited the truth. I inherited my father's love, restored, written, sealed in every letter he left behind. I inherited the chance to rebuild what she tried to break. I inherited myself. I looked out into the fading sunset and felt a peace I hadn't felt since childhood, a peace that didn't come from winning, or wealth, or justice, but from finally being free. Dad once told me, Ava, the truth is the only inheritance that never loses its value. He was right. Grace got nothing she wanted, and I got everything that mattered. Everything she couldn't forge, manipulate, or steal. Everything my father meant for me to have. Everything I needed to become whole again. And for the first time in a very long time, I smiled.